Sorry.
So we're going to be talking about different types of education policies. So to begin, I'll explain what education policy is, and basically it consists of the principles and policy decisions that influence the field of education, as well as the collection of laws and rules that govern the operation of education systems. Some examples of what education policy can help include school size, class size, privatization, teacher selection, teacher pay, teaching methods, curricular content, graduation requirements, and school infrastructure investments. Some issues debated also include higher education. And right now, states hold a constitutional right on education policy, but the federal government is advancing their role by building on state and local policies.
I did school lunches. The first, well, I'm going to do the history. The first school lunches started in Boston in 1894 with cooks in the Northeast Central Kitchen transporting foods to 15 high schools. From there, the idea of school lunches spread to states like Ohio, New York, Minnesota, and by 1913, school lunch programs were operating in 30 cities across 14 states. School lunches were often set up independently by different legislation set up by states, cities, or school districts. But in 1920, the United States Department of Agriculture defined the first standards of the elements of a child's diet, such as saying that a meal must contain milk, a protein, a fat, vegetables, fruit. New York City and Arizona attempted to provide children with 1/3 of a daily need of vomit food. This is because the requirement of a child's vitamins were unknown at the time. National groups like the National Congress of Parents and Teachers, or the PTA, started advocating for school lunches in the educational system. Their calls for reform were answered as by 1925, 3 states, Missouri, Connecticut, and Ohio, passed school lunch laws. During the Great Depression, teachers used their own money to feed children. Organizations like the American Red Cross and PTA also aided in feeding starving children across the U.S. during this time, but this was not enough. As part of FDR's New Deal, he passed the WPA, which was the first substantial contribution for school lunches from the central government. Each state had a supervisor and staff, which helped set standards for quality of meals served, standards for equipment, personnel, sanitation, and safety. After the dissolution of the WPA in 1943, public support for continuation of the school lunch program skyrocketed. This led to an introduction of 9 bills managed mostly by Congressman Flanagan. There were 2 main titles, which would become the titles of the NSLA. These were Permanent School Lunch Program and the funds for nutrition education, training, equipment. Fear that this would be a federal program led for debate for 2 years. The bill was passed and signed by Harry Truman in June 4th, 1946. The NSLA, a partnership between the central government and local governments. It stated that funds would be distributed by the federal government on the basis of population of children between the ages of 5 and 17. School lunches meet minimum nutritional requirements. And the Child Nutrition Act basically expanded these school lunch programs to pre-K and basically implemented a breakfast program for school children as well. Child hunger in America, according to Save the Children Incorporated, a Better Business Bureau accredited charity, there are 12 million children struggling with hunger in America. There's a racial divide between minorities and Caucasians, as in the state of Maryland. POC and Hispanics are almost 4 times likely to face hunger as white families. Currently, 30 million children in the U.S. depend on their school for meals. This high number can be attributed to the COVID pandemic, which left many unemployed and unable to pay for food. According to the USDA in 2021, 22% of Black children and 18.5% of Latino children were food insecure, and 24% of households headed by single mothers were food insecure as well. Because of this rising in child malnourishment during the pandemic, Congress expanded the eligibility of who can obtain a free school lunch by the FFCRA. This bill, it can also have the option to request a waiver during any time of the year if a parent is laid off or is unemployed. Usually you can only apply during the beginning of the year, but this made it so it can go throughout the entire year. Because of the still current high child malnourishment during the pandemic in the US, Senator Debbie Sabel of Michigan introduced a bill known as the Support Kids Not Red Tape Act of 2022, which has all its Democratic senators and 2 Republican senators co-sponsor this bill. Even with a high number of co-sponsors, Scopes Labs gives the bill a 4% chance of being enacted. This can be because Republicans dislike the policy's $11 billion price tag. But this bill will support meals for 10 million extra children. But having this bill cease would interrupt the meals for an estimated 30 million children, according to Senator Stabenow, who made the bill. And I just like this graph that I saw on one of the websites or books, kind of showing like the meal requirements and all that stuff. And the benefits of school lunches, according to the Food Research and Action Center, school lunches reduce food insecurity by 3.8%, reduces obesity rates by 17%, receiving free or reduced price school lunches reduces poor health by at least 29%. Children and adolescents experiencing hunger have lower grades and math scores. Teens experiencing hunger are more likely to have been suspended from school and have difficulty getting along with other children.
Alrighty, so I'm going to be talking about safer schools and the prevention of school shootings. So basically, school shootings can be defined as each and every instance a gun is brandished, is fired, or a bullet hits property for any reason, regardless of victims, time of day of the week, or reason. Since 1970, there have been 1,924 incidents involving the discharge of a firearm on school property. 637 people have died due to gun violence on school grounds, and also since 1970, 1,734 people have been injured, and 73 people have left with minor injuries after school shootings. The year 2021 had the most school shootings ever, with 249. So after every major school shooting, Congress tries to pass some type of legislation that will obviously minimize gun violence. So first, in 1990, Congress passed the Gun-Free School Zones Act, which prohibited firearms within 1,000 feet of a school. This law was later deemed unconstitutional, but then the law was enacted 4 years later, with requiring states to adopt the zero tolerance policy for weapons at school, by requiring that any student found with any type of weapon on school property had to be expelled for 1 year. And then also in 1994, Congress was more democratic and they issued a 10-year assault weapon ban. Homicides at school dropped after this ban was passed. The following school year, there was only 17, when the previous year there was 44. And then when Obama got into his presidency, he wanted to lift this ban after Sandy Hook happened, but Congress denied that. The ban expired after its 10 years with a more Republican-led Congress. And then after Sandy Hook, Obama created this 4-point plan to reduce gun violence. And this plan involved 23 executive action orders and 12 legislation proposals. So what my policy is the National Institute of Justice released a comprehensive school safety framework in the year of 2020. And this framework included 3 interconnected components, and those had to deal with physical safety, school climate, and student behavior. And the framework stated that school climate and physical safety are central to preventing school violence. The framework also suggests that target hardening measures can contribute a lot to school safety. And this was when they proposed the idea of metal detectors in their schools. It's also going to be kind of hard to fund all of these metal detectors. So the Department of Justice administers 2 grants, which are the primary source of federal funding on target hardening measures such as these metal detectors. Grants under the matching grants program for school security are administered by both the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Community Oriented Policing Services Office. And the grants from this COPS office focuses more on traditional target hardening measures, so that's where the funding for the metal detectors would come from. While grants from the Bureau of Justice Assistance focuses more on threat assessments and the prevention of all school violence. So some kind of history on metal detectors. They were first used in the 1989 to 1990 school year, and that was in a Detroit high school. They were first only allowed to be used in areas with super high crime rates. But right now in the United States, 2% of elementary schools, 7% of middle schools, and 10% of high schools actually have metal detectors in their building. But why don't more schools do them? First of all, the students don't want to be perceived as unsafe or not trustworthy by their authority figures. Second, while it is legal to have metal detectors in your school, a lot of people argue that it's unconstitutional and it violates the Fourth Amendment, which has to do with the protection of unlawful searches and seizures. So a lot of people just think it's a violation of their privacy to be searched before going to school. And finally, it doesn't solve the root issue of why school shootings are happening, like bullying and mental health issues of the shooter. And just lastly, some more pros. In New York City schools, there was an increase of firearms that were found thanks to metal detectors. They stated that over 1,000 firearms could have been missed if they did not have metal detectors in these certain schools. Also, the Department of Homeland Security highly recommends metal detectors in schools. They also provide a sense of security for students and staff who struggle with thoughts of shootings. No student or teacher wants to go to school and fear that there could be a school shooting at their school, so just knowing that there are metal detectors there give you that sense of security. Being aware that metal detectors are present scares people into not wanting to bring in their guns. Like if the district is advertising that they have metal detectors at their school, not a lot of gunmen are gonna try to go in and shoot them up. And finally, while metal detectors are not foolproof or the final option for preventing school shootings, they do their job.
Our policy is on free community college and are trying to answer the question of should the federal government offer free tuition. So free community college focuses on the idea that tuition and fees are free if you're trying to pursue a two-year degree at a public university. It's appealing, but it's not always realistic. There's a diverse population that attends community colleges, including high school graduates, adults broadening their education, and displaced workers. Community colleges were founded in 1920 and they were all free until the mid-80s when fees per credit were assessed. The tuition averages less than $3,500 per year, which being here, that sounds really nice, but a lot of people still can't afford that. The root cause of it is that less individuals are attending four-year colleges. More low-income individuals are pursuing careers and trying to broaden their education. Potential students are attending due to the costs. And community colleges may be a better option for certain degrees, so they are still very important. This graph just shows that community college tuition is rising slower than public four-year universities. There's some pros and cons with free community college. The pros are that it makes attending community colleges more accessible to all students. It helps everyone get equal opportunity to get a college education. It can help decrease student debt, and there'll be more educated people in the workforce, which can benefit our overall economy. And then some of the cons are that taxpayers would have to spend billions to subsidize tuition. Persistence among students and graduation rates will decrease, because since they don't have to pay for it, they won't try as hard and won't be as motivated. Less individuals will attend four-year colleges, so colleges like St. Ben, St. John's might hurt from this, and then the overall cost of community college will increase. There's nearly 30 states that offer some sort of free community college, and its majority of them are limited to low-income students. And then programs and eligibility varies between states, depending on if you've lived or attended high school in that state. There's also federal Pell Grants that help low-income students anyways, so if the state doesn't offer free community college, these grants pay for a majority of it anyways. It's not always free. There's still other costs associated, like housing, books, other school supplies, and then states can provide free tuition by first dollar grants that waive tuition and fees irrespective of any other funding that the student might qualify for. The other option is last dollar grants, which fill in any gaps after a student receives awards that aren't enough to cover the full cost. This map just shows like what states have offered for community college and what programs. Free community college has been a more prominent topic lately because it's a major campaign point for President Biden. It's been a part of several bills and acts over the past couple of years, but none of them have really been passed yet. Republicans tend to be more against it and liberals tend to be more supportive of it. And one of the bills is the American Families Plan. It provides 2 years of free community college for millions of Americans. Students can use the benefit over 3 years. If in some reason they might not be able to get it done in 2 years, they have an extra year. Biden wants to pay for the $109 billion by taxing the rich. And obviously, the rich aren't too keen on that idea. And if all states, territories, and tribes participate, 5.5 million students won't have to pay any money in tuition fees. There's also a reconciliation bill. It originally included free community college to everyone, including illegal immigrants, which was very controversial, but ended up not being included in the final package. And then there's the American College Promise Act, and it creates a partnership between the federal government, states, and Indian tribes to help them waive resident tuition and fees for 2 years of community college programs. My suggestion is that we just keep it up to the states. We don't have to worry about passing any bills, and the taxes won't have to rise for everyone. But it does have an impact on disadvantaged groups. It's more positive than negative because it will give disadvantaged groups an equal opportunity as everyone else. The attendance of minority groups will rise. Enrollment will increase, but it can't guarantee achievement. Just because it's free doesn't mean they will graduate or succeed. There is still an need for academic support that will help keep students on track. And 51% of students that attend community colleges identify as a race other than white.
Maybe this will pass on with student debt. Student debt is not a massive economic factor in the United States. It's important that it's covered in the education presentation. Student debt is the money college students will have to pay back to their colleges and universities that they attended. Sums of money can become amount of debt that some graduates never be able to pay off. History and policy. So in 1840, the first student loans are offered to students at Harvard University. 1867, the United States Department of Education is formed. 1958, federal students are first offered under, federal student loans are first offered under the National Defense Education Act. 1965, the Higher Education Act is established to provide educational opportunity grants to colleges, recruiting students with considerable financial need. 1965, the Higher Education Act also established the Guaranteed Student Loan Program, also known as the Federal Family Education Loan Program, or FFELP. It allows banks and private institutions to provide government subsidized and guaranteed loans to students. 1992, the Higher Education Amendments of 1992 created the FAFSA, the Direct Lending Program, and unsubsidized Stanford loans. We are beginning to see the modern day student loan system. Continue. 1993, the Student Loan Reform Act officially implements the Direct Lending Program, which has been the only system since 1965. 2005, the Higher Education Reconciliation Act reduces loan fees from 4% to 1% and allows graduate students to take out plus loans. 2008, credit market problems stemming from the Great Recession forces many private lenders to back out of FFELP. Outstanding student loan debt is now at $639 billion. 2010, legislation proposed under the Obama administration eliminates FFELP and now requires all new federal student loans to be direct loans as part of the direct lending program. At this time, private lenders will begin offering private student loans to students independently from the government. Outstanding student loan debt is now at $811 billion. 2012, total amount of student debt passes $1 trillion. Recent policy. In 2021, outstanding student loan debt sits at $1.7 trillion. In March of 2020, COVID pushes the federal government to put all federal student loans in pandemic forbearance, which means no payments are required, it just won't accrue. In January 2021, the newly formed Biden administration extends pandemic forbearance until October 2021. 2022, in August, the Biden administration announces student loan relief for borrowers. This relief comes in forms of up to $20,000 in debt cancellation to Pell Grant recipients. The student with loans held by the Department of Education up to $10,000 in debt cancellation to non-Pell Grant recipients. To be eligible, individuals must have an income of less than $125,000. The administration also announces that the pause on federal student loan repayments would be extended through the remainder of the year. In addition to this relief, a new income-driven payment plan was proposed that would cap the monthly payments on undergraduate loans to 5% of the borrower's discretionary income. So, root cause of the crisis: rising college costs, uninformed high school graduates making poor financial decisions, increase in jobs requiring college degrees, and loans being guaranteed by the federal government. Why is it important? Student debt has shown to be a massive negative factor in the economy, specifically the housing market, as students graduate from college and are burdened by loans. They're less likely to get involved in the housing market. May discourage future generations to attend at all, as they see the rising debt and business. Combat it and discourage students. Which may lead to a less educated nation with unqualified workforce. Impact on minority groups. Among bachelor's degree holders, Black or African American students are the most likely to borrow federal loans at 76%. On average, Black or African American students borrowers, African American student borrowers owe 6% more than they borrow, while white or Caucasian borrowers owe 10% less. 4 years after graduation, 48% of Black student borrowers and 17% of white student borrowers owe more than they initially borrowed. Among graduate students, 40% of Black students and 22% of white students accumulate debt for graduate school. What do I suggest? I suggest two different possible solutions. First, something that could help is required financial education while in high school. I believe the root of this problem lies with high school students who come out and want to go to college, but make a poor financial decision and get too many loans. So if they're educated better financially while in high school, then they make smarter decisions coming out of high school. Federal inspection of all colleges in the U.S. and how their tuition is paid by students. This is to be sure that even private institutions are putting tuition to good use and not overcharging students.
All right, so I have rural broadband, and what that is an internet service in rural areas that we know as like country or countryside. So this is gonna be your places like farms, mountains, villages, stuff like that. All right, so the history of rural broadband. In 1949, the NRUCA formed a telephone committee. This composed of representatives of emerging joint electric and telephone cooperative organizations that implemented telephones in rural areas. In the 1960s, membership grew very quickly and it reached 100 rural telephone cooperatives by then. In the 90s, so late 80s, early 90s, rural areas were offered hybrid uplink services. This costed them $600, and in today's money, that's close to $1,700 or just over $700. And since 2000, rural areas have been offered satellite internet, but satellite internet is known to have high latency. It is slower than cable and fiber. Satellite average megabytes per second is 31, and cable is 50 megabytes per second average. And it is very vulnerable to bad weather. So broadband in America, as of 2019, 14.5 million people from rural areas lacked access to high-speed broadband service, according to the FCC. High-speed internet is 25 megabytes per second download and 3 megabytes per second of upload. So large cities on average have a download speed of over 120 megabytes per second. So as you can see here, Minneapolis has an average of 166 megabytes. Chicago with 199, and San Francisco with 176. While rural areas of America on average have a download speed of 14. So places like Silva, North Carolina have 11 megabytes per second, and Grayson, Kentucky with 11 as well. So two root causes of this are low population density and geographic barriers. So only about 1 in 5 Americans live in rural America, or 19.3%, and the rural youth collectively comprise of only 20% of public school students. So in this graph here, you can see kind of like the plains and like South Dakota, North Dakota, and farther west are where the population density starts to become lower and lower. And where in rural America also matters. So if you're living in mountains, it causes harder paths for the signal to go between the signal tower and your house. And it will cause your internet to be spottier and may go out more often. And then, as I said before, the sparse amount of people causes internet companies to put less and less signal towers for people to use. And then because internet companies cannot profit off of this, and the cost of underground fiber costs $1 to $6 per linear foot, and aerial fiber, which is on top of those signals, costs about 8 to 12 per linear foot. This makes it so that one route mile of line can cost anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000. So how does this affect students? Rural students are on par to graduate high school, but less likely to go to college and get a bachelor's degree. So on this graph here in 2019, 21% of students, rural students, went and got a bachelor's degree, while 34.7% of urban students went and got a bachelor's degree. But a high school diploma, you can see that rural students are even more likely to get a high school diploma, but less likely to go and get an associate degree or a bachelor's. In the long term, students lack the adequate tech-related skills that in an increasingly digital world are now kind of like crucial in college admittance and for most careers. Students with internet access have substantially higher digital skills, which are a strong predictor of performance on standardized tests. So a study by Michigan State showed that students who rely on a cell phone only or who have no home internet access had a skills gap similar to the gap in digital skill between 8th and 11th grade students. In this, they also found that students with modestly lower digital skills perform worse on the SAT test. On a scale from 0 to 64, the average was around 30, but a student who performed modestly lower in digital skills scored about 7 percentiles lower on the SAT. So impacts on disadvantaged and minority groups. Rural broadband is predominantly pronounced in rural southern areas with a high Black population. A study by Third Way shows that as counties' African American population rises, broadband availability drops. Nearly 75% of rural counties where most of the residents are white have broadband. And an average broadband availability is just 56% in rural counties where the majority are African American. As well as a fifth of students, 21%, live in households that receive food stamps. These kids were 16% less likely to have access to high-speed internet and 10% less likely to have access to internet at all. On this graph, if you are Asian or white, you have almost double or 4 times more likely to have access to a computer at home, and then you are about 10% more likely to have high-speed internet at home as well. So my reform suggestions, as of right now, the USDA is investing $401 million to provide access to high-speed internet for 31,000 residents and businesses in 11 states. It is also later said that $65 billion would ensure every American has high-speed internet. So my suggestion was, while it might not be popular, is to cut military spending by just 1% each year for just over 8 years and use it towards building more lines and signal towers. Just 1% would be $8 billion, and it would take about 8 years and I believe 6 weeks to make sure everyone in America has high-speed internet.
I guess the question. Go ahead.
Well, since for Jack, you said that POCs were like 4 times more likely than white families to get what was it, free lunches. You said that was in Maryland. Is that a similar statistic nationwide?
Oh, I said that in Maryland, POC families were most likely to, I believe it's to not afford food or to be malnourished and things like
Is
that.
that similar nationwide 4 times
Yeah.
usually?
Yeah, but Maryland is like a more like extreme example, but.
Yeah.
I was about to say Maryland is far bit by more people in Maryland than there are in
Yeah,
downtown Minneapolis. It's like Maryland is a really large black population. Friend topics for policy memos, and the policy memo is obviously moving on from this, so, I think everybody is not true. Some people have much clearer suggestions than others, and so when you write these up, think about what your audience, this goes for everyone, but like, what's your audience? And sometimes it's really easy, like, it's obvious that workers you have to go for a national policy. Is there anybody suggesting anything like this, or is it just all kind of bits and pieces with, I know the FCC does some funding, and I know that because I'm watching the heavy machinery sitting at the local internet provider, their parking lot, waiting to come down my road at $4,000 a mile. Where basically the whole of this side of the lake is cut off from rural area, so cut off from broadband, so I'm just waiting. So that I know that there's a grant, they got a grant, so it's all like, it's not just like federal government is just gonna give this money, but like they've already given quite a bit. But it's really, you're right to put, I mean, it's good to put that up there as a comparison, but when you're writing a memo, you have to say, not just, like, let's take the money from this pot, but what are the costs and benefits of it? And I think in terms of education, you made a pretty good argument that you can't leave a quarter of the students, the country's students, out of this loop, which provides benefit. And also, I think maybe linking that back to the pandemic might also, because I think the pictures of kids in McDonald's parking lots in rural, did anyone see that when the pandemic's on? He didn't see that. Okay, I live in a rural area. There were kids in the McDonald's parking lot during the pandemic because that was the only place that they could get enough broadband to do download. And so that's a real problem, right? You can't leave rural kids out of the loop. So I think bringing that in. So what else? I have notes. We had the hand up. Oh yeah, Jack.
I was gonna say like, something that I did not mention because I didn't wanna, it's like take up like a lot of time, but New York City and Cleveland have a 8% to 60% tax on liquor, which they use to help pay for free school lunches for impoverished kids. So that's one thing that they can do, but.
Right. So what you need to, so what's your policy suggestion then? What do you think should happen, and which audience are you aiming at? 'Cause that's one of the things I had on yours.
I was thinking about either having like a tax on liquor, or I was just
But we already have school lunches, right? We have free school lunches in Minnesota.
well, yeah, but it's to expand
To
the
expand it.
to expand the qualifications of it. Because yes, there are free school lunches for kids who are really impoverished, but there's still kids who would really need free school lunches that don't have it.
Right.
And that's what the current bill is trying to do, is to expand qualifications for one more year.
Is there, like, like school lunch debt is an issue, right? Is that true? I would like to know those numbers too in your policy memo. I think that would be helpful. Because that could be another sort of strand of the problem, like. It's not the really poor kids who get free lunch all the time, it's the kids, the low income kids who don't quite qualify, so you're right, it's. Make that clear, that you're talking about this, you know. Kids whose dads just lost their job, and the mom only works X number of hours, and then, you know, the family is newly indigent and can't afford it, it's that second quintile, right? So people, not the people who earn no money, but people who earn some. Okay, I thought those were really good. Any other questions while I? Yeah, so. Is this a so the thinking about it, is it a national policy or one for just Minnesota? Or whatever your state is, I mean, you're interested in, people are interested in Wisconsin. Or wherever you live, it's fine. So thinking about where you're aiming your policy, and then you can refine it as you do things. I thought these were great. Good. As when you write these up, a lot of these things that are hazy now will become clear, because you'll have to say, it's going to cost this much to do this, but the benefits are this and this, and over time. So anytime you're talking about education, it looks like things cost money, right? But like Jess, issue about, well, kids don't focus well if they're hungry. So, you know, you're actually increasing the focus. Why is it good to have kids educated? Well, educated kids are much more productive. Like an educated workforce is many times more productive than an uneducated workforce. So national policy says we should educate people, and every year of education, like, really does a substantial job of increasing your productivity. You don't want an uneducated workforce, even if they're picking rocks out of farm fields. In general, I thought that was very good, so well done.
Actually, my job to do. Picking rocks.
Picking rocks is terrible, but an educated person picking rocks is actually even more productive than a non-educated person. Unless they're old and have had.
So big rocks out into the ground.
They could do indeed. If you want to see big rocks, just take a walk down. Oh, I don't know if you can see it from the road. You can almost see my brothers-in-law each have a farm on Fruit Farm Road. One's a very small one, bigger one. You can see these rock piles with an old tractor skeleton on it. Those rocks came out of that field, and some of them are just like, they're huge. They're like half the size of that room. It's like, it's unbelievable. Big rocks come out of the ground, and this is they call it Granite City for a reason. Good. All right. Do you have any questions on that? All right. Anybody have any questions for me?
Did you figure out to get that?
What the? Oh, I have a message, but they have like lots of videos. Okay. I realize that big one's problem. Let me know you're all out. Yep. Okay. So, but should have that. I make that.